The conflict is about the future of Ukraine, but Ukraine is also a larger stage for Russia to try to reassert its influence in Europe and the world, and for Putin to cement his legacy. There are no small things for Putin, and he may decide that the only way to achieve them is to launch another incursion into Ukraine, an act that, at its most aggressive, could lead to tens of thousands of civilian deaths, a European refugee crisis, and a response from Western allies that includes tough sanctions affecting the global economy. The US and Russia have drawn firm red lines that help explain what's at stake. Russia presented the US with a list of demands, some of which were non-starters for the United States and its allies in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. Putin demanded that NATO stop its eastward expansion and deny membership to Ukraine, and that NATO roll back troop deployment in countries that had joined after 1997, which would turn back the clock decades on Europe's security and geopolitical alignment. These ultimatums are a Russian attempt not only to secure interest in Ukraine, but essentially relitigate the security architecture in Europe, said Michael Kaufman, research director in the Russia Studies program at CNA, a research and analysis organization in Arlington, Virginia. As expected, the US and NATO rejected those demands. Both the US and Russia know Ukraine is not going to become a NATO member anytime soon. The roots of the current crisis grew from the breakup of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union broke up in the early 90s, Ukraine, a former Soviet republic, had the third largest atomic arsenal in the world. The United States and Russia worked with Ukraine to denuclearize the country, and in a series of diplomatic agreements, Kyiv gave its hundreds of nuclear warheads back to Russia in exchange for security assurances that protected it from a potential Russian attack. Those assurances were put to the test in 2014 when Russia invaded Ukraine. Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula and backed a rebellion led by pro-Russia separatists in the eastern Donbas region. The conflict in eastern Ukraine has killed more than 14,000 people to date. Russia's assault grew out of mass protests in Ukraine that toppled the country's pro-Russian president, Viktor Yanukovych, partially over his abandonment of a trade agreement with the European Union. US diplomats visited the demonstrations in symbolic gestures that further agitated Putin. President Barack Obama, hesitant to escalate tensions with Russia any further, was slow to mobilize a diplomatic response in Europe and did not immediately provide Ukrainians with offensive weapons. A lot of us were really appalled that not more was done for the violation of that post-Soviet agreement, said Ian Kelly, a career diplomat who served as ambassador to Georgia from 2015 to 2018. It just basically showed that if you have nuclear weapons, as Russia does, you're inoculated against strong measures by the international community. But the very premise of a post-Soviet Europe is also helping to fuel today's conflict. Putin has been fixated on reclaiming some semblance of empire lost with the fall of the Soviet Union. Ukraine is central to this vision. Putin has said Ukrainians and Russians were one people, a single whole, or at least would be if not for the meddling from outside forces, as in the West, that has created a wall between the two. Ukraine isn't joining NATO in the near future, and President Joe Biden has said as much. The core of the NATO treaty is Article 5, a commitment that an attack on any NATO country is treated as an attack on the entire alliance, meaning any Russian military engagement of a hypothetical NATO member Ukraine would theoretically bring Moscow into conflict with the US, the UK, France, and the 27 other NATO members. Why is Russia attacking Ukraine now? The Russia-Ukraine crisis is a continuation of the one that began in 2014. But recent political developments within Ukraine, the US, Europe, and Russia help explain why Putin may feel now is the time to act. Among those developments are the 2019 election of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, a comedian who played a president on TV and then became the actual president. In addition to the other thing you might remember Zelensky for, he promised during his campaign that he would reboot peace talks to end the conflict in eastern Ukraine, including dealing with Putin directly to resolve the conflict. Russia, too, likely thought it could get something out of this. It saw Zelensky, a political novice, as someone who might be more open to Russia's point of view. What Russia wants is for Zelensky to implement the 2014 and 2015 Minsk agreements, deals that would bring the pro-Russian regions back into Ukraine, but would amount to, as one expert said, a Trojan horse for Moscow to wield influence and control. No Ukrainian president could accept those terms, and so Zelensky, under continued Russian pressure, has turned to the West for help, talking openly about wanting to join NATO. Public opinion in Ukraine has also strongly swayed support for ascension into Western bodies like the EU and NATO. That may have left Russia feeling as though it has exhausted all of its political and diplomatic tools to bring Ukraine back into the fold. Moscow's security elites felt that they had to act now because if they don't, military cooperation between NATO and Ukraine will become even more intense and even more sophisticated. Sarah Pagong of the German Council on Foreign Relations said, Putin tested the West on Ukraine again in the spring of 2021, gathering forces and equipment near parts of the border. The troop buildup got the attention of the new Biden administration, which led to an announced summit between the two leaders. Days later, Russia began drawing down some of the troops on the border. Putin's perspective on the US has also shifted, experts said. To Putin, the chaotic Afghanistan withdrawal, which Moscow would know something about, and the US's domestic turmoil are signs of weakness. Putin may also see the West divided on the US's role in the world. Biden is still trying to put the transatlantic alliance back together after the distrust that built up during the Trump administration. Some of Biden's diplomatic blunders have alienated European partners, specifically that aforementioned messy Afghanistan withdrawal and the nuclear submarine deal that Biden rolled out with the UK and Australia that caught France off guard. Europe has its own internal fractures too. The EU and the UK are still dealing with the fallout from Brexit. Everyone is grappling with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Germany has a new chancellor, Olaf Scholz, after 16 years of Angela Merkel, and the new coalition government is still trying to establish its foreign policy. Germany, along with other European countries, imports Russian natural gas, and energy prices are spiking right now. France has elections in April, and the French President Emmanuel Macron is trying to carve out a spot for himself in these negotiations. At dawn of 24th of February 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Russian military vehicles crossed the Ukrainian border in several places. By air, land, and sea, Russia has launched a devastating attack on Ukraine, a European democracy of 44 million people. For months, President Vladimir Putin has denied he would invade his neighbor. But then, he tore up a peace deal, sending forces across borders in Ukraine's north, east, and south. So that's the end of the video. Make sure to like the video and share it with your loved ones, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the notification bell for more amazing content. Until the next video, take care.